Hello and welcome to the Arsenal Bite Size Podcast. I'm your host Clayton, and we're here for the final match day of the Champions League phase. We're here to preview the Girona game, and joining me to preview the game is Angus. Angus, welcome back to the pod. How are we doing?
Yeah, always happy to be back on and nerding out about something to do with European football. So it's all good for me.
Indeed, I love nerding out about it, but I love learning from the nerding perspective because I think the last one you were on was the Atalanta pod, weren't it?
Yeah.
So you gave us a little bit of a rundown on what we could expect from Atalanta and a bit about their history. And I believe you've got a little bit of info on Girona for us. So before we get into that, just shout out Uncle Mike who's in the chat. Good afternoon, mate. Hope you're all good. If you've got any questions for Angus on Girona, what to expect for tomorrow, let us know. If anyone else is live in the chat, let us know how you're feeling ahead of tomorrow. What would you do with the team? Would you rotate it? Would you play the kids? Would you go full strength? And what do you think the score will be? But yeah, to set the scene, it's match day 8 we're coming up to. We're third in the Champions League, 16 points. Barca are second on 18. Liverpool first on 21. Outrageous that. 7 wins out of 7. Girona, our opponents, are 31st. They've won 1 game and lost 6. In La Liga, they are, if I can find it, I just had it, they're 8th. So I don't know too much about Girona as a football club. Their performance in La Liga, would you say that is fair for where they should be? Are they punching above their weight? How would you assess Girona's performance? Because I look at the Champions League, I look at their domestic league, and I'm struggling to come to a conclusion.
So I think they've probably underperformed a little bit in the Champions League. Is probably sort of the truth of it there. It's a bit of a weird one. I mean, I sort of will get on a little bit, I guess, to sort of the difference from last season to this season. But I think they're probably roughly a mid-table club. So you can look at it in terms of 8th, but they're like 1 point ahead of Sevilla in 12th in La Liga. So it's in that sort of middle bit is probably about where they belong, really.
Sure. Okay. And you said to me before we went live, you know a little bit about their manager and you know a little bit about how they've kind of arrived where they are, right? And I know there's the kind of connection on the City group as well, which I know you said you didn't want to go into too much detail, but where do you want to start in terms of your knowledge on Girona? And like, why do you know about them? And is that from the kind of being an enthusiast with European football, or is there anything deeper than that?
So it's mainly just following Spanish football. And so particularly, I think ownership has been a question mark in the last few years in Spain. They've had an influx of things like American ownership. And so ownership has also become a little bit of a topic. There's also been some like incredible sort of ownership situations that are just domestic based. If anyone wants to look at some of the stuff around Sevilla's ownership, for example, that's sort of a little go away and read project in terms of a father-son feud over the ownership of a club that's always fun. So I think particularly with Girona, it obviously exploded last season, but I think there was a little bit of an ongoing conversation within Spain with them about the ownership, which I think has made it an interesting topic.
Sure. And in terms of them, like when I was looking at and doing my research about them, I'm sure I read somewhere that they only came up to La Liga like within the last 10 years or something, right? So what was the kind of story behind them getting to where they are? Like, have they established themselves as a relatively stable mid-table La Liga side, or?
Yes, I mean, I think the first time they got promoted was only in 2016-17. And that was when they got promoted, that was when the City group got involved.
Right.
So I'm not sure how exactly how exactly they identified them, a newly promoted club, what it was about them that they were like, we want a piece of that. But they bought a 44.3% share of the club at that point.
Okay.
There's also 44.3% of the club that's held by the Girona Football Group, which just happens to be headed up by Pep Guardiola's brother.
No way.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I'd heard of the City Group connections, but I didn't know about the kind of sister club being the other stake of the club being headed up by Pep's brother. That's mad.
Yeah, and I think he's like the director of football there or something like that as well. So there's all these sort of linkages in. They did actually get relegated again in 2018-19 and only came back in the 21-22 season. So they've only been sort of back in the league. This is their third season back in the league, which is part of, I think, what made last season so remarkable.
And so for someone that doesn't know what happened last season, what happened last season?
So I think people got a little bit carried away with the idea that they were challenging for the title. I think them fading a little bit was always going to happen, but they ended up sort of being in and around the title race for quite a lot of the season. Ended up finishing third. Barcelona ended up going past them. Real Madrid obviously won the league, but they were in and around the title race for a lot of the season. And, you know, for a club like that, that's, you know, second year back in the league and everything, I think it's sort of a remarkable thing to think about.
Yeah. What was the reason behind them being able to get to that level last season?
So I think it's a perfect storm of things, really. Like there were a few of these clubs that you would think would be the sort of next teams up. Like there was underperformance for a lot of the season from Barcelona in particular, sort of Atletico Madrid to a degree as well. But it was also the underperformance of a lot of these clubs, like, you know, your Real Sociedads and your Villarreals, and sort of drop off from Sevilla and that sort of thing. The clubs that you would think might be able to take advantage of that, and the perfect storm of, like, they just had a bunch of sort of the right players at the right time, all performing well. And yeah, just one of these like mad runs where you would just see sort of things like late wins or just finding a way in a way that was unusual, really.
Interesting. Fair play. Yeah, it's only now that you said it that I actually remember that, because it was something that kept popping up on my timeline of like, oh my god, this team Girona, like, are they going to go win the league? And then I think where you said they faded away, I think that happened with them on my timeline. Like, I just don't remember hearing anything about them again, to be honest. So yeah, bringing it to them kind of this season, and yeah, how would you kind of describe their style of play and the way they approach games under their manager?
So I think in general they want it to be possession based. There are some, like, it's not the same as sort of City. There's obviously a lot of sort of people will want to be like, oh yeah, City group probably play the same. It's not quite. I mean, for example, they do play with two sort of out and out wide players that they want to stay high, and, you know, it tends to be sort of a 4-3-3. They're, you know, possession based. There are elements that are similar, you know, moves into a back three more often than not, sort of fullback more often steps into midfield, but occasionally can then go down the line in the way you have seen with teams like City. You know, sort of solid midfield, and then the front three, there's often sort of one player who might break forward more often from midfield, but so it's that sort of structure. And unfortunately, probably a lot of the players that really helped it work last season have all left.
Oh, really? So who was? Because I was looking at them, and like I've seen they've got a couple of big injuries this year, but I didn't compare their squads to last year. So who are some of the players that have left that we would have been aware of?
So it's some people will have heard of some of them, maybe not of others. But for example, last season they had Jan Koto on loan from Man City, who is now at Borussia Dortmund.
Okay.
They had Savinho, of course.
Oh shit! Yeah, I've completely forgot that one.
Yeah, I want to touch on him and the sort of, you know,
please do. Yeah, I'm intrigued on that one.
City group activity with Savinho. They also signed Yangel Herrera from Man City. He's still there, but they had Eric Garcia, another one formerly of Man City, on loan from Barcelona. They also had Aleix Garcia, who in the summer went to Bayer Leverkusen. They had the big striker, Artem Dovbyk, who then moved on in the summer to Roma.
Okay.
And if you take out, I think it's Garcia, Savinho, and Dovbyk, you're just eliminating so much of their attacking output from last season. Not to mention then taking out a couple of those players like Koto in terms of a good sort of fullback, and Eric Garcia is playing sort of centre back for them and that sort of thing. It's a significant chunk of the team that's sort of been stripped out as a result of that. And they invested to try and replace them, but when you have all those players playing so well together and they all go, it can then cause a bit of a knock-on sort of issue.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's interesting, like a lot of those players sound familiar, but I was just looking through their squad as well, and there's so many familiar names there. Like I mean, I'll read out the ones that I think loads of people will know, but Gazaniga, the goalkeeper, Daley Blin's there. You've got Van der Beek, Brian Hill on loan from Spurs, Danjuma.
Yeah.
I did not know he was there. Obviously, he was really highly rated at Villa. What was the point he was highest rated? Was it Villarreal? I think so.
Yeah, when they made the Champions League semis.
Yeah, and like there's quite a few familiar faces in there. So yeah, interesting group. And yeah, I think the thing that you said there about like Pep's brother owning 43% of the shares or something, and like you hear about the recruitment and stuff, it sounds, I don't know, I don't want to go down that route because I'm not well researched enough on them as a football club, to be honest. But like you said, you wanted to speak about the Savinho deal, so that's one I'm interested in. What is it about that deal that made you kind of want to talk about?
Just to touch briefly on that, I think it's it's where I would sort of say you can't help but draw the connections with City. They've obviously, I mean, even someone like Aleix Garcia, who they didn't sign from City but had previously been at City, was very important for them. So you can't sort of say they're not connected. But I think that recruiting from City and from the City group is only a part of their sort of recruitment. But you can also look at things like, would a similar level club be able to spend the sort of money on, 10 million on a player that they did if it wasn't for that sort of setup?
And is that Savinho that they signed for 10 million?
So I think it was that sort of range. It might have been about 8 for Dovbyk when they brought him in from Ukraine. So it's that sort of thing where it's just like you can't completely draw the line. I wouldn't say it's solely influenced by the City connections, but I mean, even like Eric Garcia on loan from Barcelona, but it was a player they knew from Man City. So there's those connections throughout. I mean, I think it was the 23-24 season. They brought in Tati Castellanos, who's a striker. People might remember him because they brought him in on loan from New York City FC. People might remember him because in that season, he scored 4 goals in a game against Real Madrid.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I think that was the 22-23 season. But yeah, so that was sort of, but that was another City group move. So it does sort of pepper their transfer activity, even if it isn't solely that.
Yeah, okay, interesting.
But Savinho, yeah. So I think it was 2022, who's the record signing for Troyes in France. Between the time he signed for Troyes and the time he signed for Man City, he played 0 games for Troyes.
Right.
So he signed for Troyes. He was immediately loaned to PSV.
Okay.
He was their record signing. This was sort of, a relatively sort of minor Ligue 1 club. They spent 6.5 million euros on Savinho.
And loaned him straight
out to PSV. In the process, in that season, while he was on loan at PSV, Troyes got relegated.
Okay.
Then they loaned him out the next season to Girona. Troyes would have been relegated again, but Bordeaux went bust, so Troyes got to stay in Ligue 2. But they would have been relegated if that hadn't happened. So back-to-back relegations with their record transfer, playing 0 games for them. And then he moves to Man City.
Is there anything in Troyes' ownership, like within a group? Are they connected at all to any of the City group or anything?
So they are a City group club.
Oh, fuck it now.
Yeah. They are a City group club. So they signed the player into the group. Like PSV obviously aren't in the City group, but Girona are.
Yeah.
But so they signed him into the City group. Record transfer, never played a game for the club. They would have been back-to-back relegated if Bordeaux hadn't gone bust last season.
I know this is a Girona preview podcast, but I feel like you're doing the team talk for the Man City preview podcast on Friday already. Like, that's mind-blowing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of protests there in terms of, like, particularly, obviously, it would have been back-to-back relegations and things like that, where it's like, I think that's where I think it's a real example. And it's less so the case with Girona, but I think they're still comfortable with where they are at this point. But the dangers of the multi-club model, not to get sort of high and mighty about it, but at some point there is probably going to be a club that is done a disservice in this model. And I think that's where we've seen it with Savinho in particular. But then obviously, unfortunately for Girona, he had, it was great for them that he had their breakout season for them, but even on their books, they don't get any benefit from that because he was on loan from Troyes and went from Troyes to Man City. So it's this weird sort of cycle almost, just in one player.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know about Troyes as a football club, and my knowledge of Savinho was so limited. It was literally, he was part of Girona, who were part of the City group, but Man City bought him. I didn't know that kind of context and backstory to him. So yeah, that's interesting. What is your thoughts on, I know we're going on a bit of a tangent here, but I'm just curious because you're a lot more educated on these things than I am. What's your thoughts on the kind of multi-club model? Because I've seen it pop up in Arsenal circles as and divide opinions on should it be something we look at in the future or not. Do you have any opinions on it?
I see the benefits to it. I'm not going to pretend that it's, there's no benefit. And even to the other clubs, I can see how there can be benefit. You have these connections, you have these weird sort of club partnerships that you then have these weird club partnerships that aren't sort of same ownership, but we're going to do deals with each other. And it's like, okay, that's a bit weird. But I think it's just being conscious of, like I say, the thing that more often than not, there's going to be at least one club, particularly the more a group expands, that sort of gets either sort of left behind or neglected or, doesn't feel the benefits of that. And so obviously
the accidental child syndrome.
Yeah. And so in this case, for example, it's Troyes, but I think that's the one danger. But I think it distorts things in a way that I'm not entirely comfortable with. You look at, but I think the thing that sort of frustrates me more in general about multi-club ownership is the way, particularly when we're talking about things like transfers, people pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
When it's like, oh yeah, this player is being signed for Strasbourg, or Chelsea are negotiating with Strasbourg, and it's like, the meme of the guy with a phone up to each ear. We don't have to pretend that's not the case. And I think there would probably be a more healthy discussion about it if we weren't also having these sort of transfer stories or whatever, where it's pretending that they were separate entities.
Yeah, no, 100%. No, that's super interesting. Is there anything more on Girona that you think would be good, or anything you want to share about them before we turn attention to tomorrow's fixture?
I don't think so, because I think the only other things I have will sort of play a part in talking about the fixture.
Okay, cool. So we'll turn attention to tomorrow then. So before we do, I was going to read through Girona's lineup from their weekend match, but just curious on your thoughts on kind of campaign so far. How, from an Arsenal, I must say, for anyone that's tuned in and is hearing Angus talk in detail about Girona, he's not a Girona fan. He's an Arsenal fan, by the way. He just happens to be an enthusiast on European football, if I can put those words in your mouth.
Yeah.
So, curious from the Arsenal fan perspective, how have you found the campaign for us so far?
Generally positive. I have to say, I know there's been a lot of debate about the format back and forth, even up until now. I'm still not entirely sold on it. I think it's gone better than I thought, but I'm still not entirely sold on the format. But I think we've gone well in it, which obviously helps. I think we've sort of made the most of it in terms of we probably had a slightly sort of easier draw on paper outside of one or two games where it's sort of even getting someone like PSG in terms of the top tier teams, where it's actually that's probably a nicer game than we could have got, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, made the most of it, sitting in third, when it's Liverpool have obviously run away with it, but it's Barcelona, sort of us, Inter, it's great. And I think there's a little bit of, it would be nice to get up into that top two, because having seen a little bit about the format, meaning that, obviously you start thinking it forward as a fan. And the fact that it meant we would avoid Liverpool for the rest of the tournament until the final is quite nice. But
yeah, no, I've not really looked into the long-term permutations and all of that, but because I did see mixed opinions on like, do we want to finish second or do we want to finish fourth based on who was like 15th, 16th, 17th? Do you have any kind of strong thoughts on that?
no, I think after that, particularly because in that second group, well, just like I know we're top 8, no problem, that's clinched basically.
Well,
Unless we
even
get
that was weird.
unless
It's like,
unless we get like smashed and 5 teams win, we're not going to
yeah,
finish top 8. Like, so I think but beyond that, it could change so much. Like I was reading something about City today, and there's like 4 different positions they could finish in, and like however many different teams they could then face just in terms of whoever finishes in like 12th or 13th or whatever. So I'm not too worried about that. I'm just sort of like, just see where we finish, see what shakes out from that. It might be that we end up with someone who's not particularly good in as a result of finishing like 5th, and it ends up that actually 5th was the place you wanted to finish or whatever. So I think getting in the top 2 would be nice, just because one of the few things I do know about the format is that first and second stay apart until the final.
yeah.
But apart from that, I'm not too concerned about it, because it's also trying to project something where it's just like you think you're getting, to use an example, Lille, who aren't bad, but you'd sort of look at that and be quite happy with it, and you end up getting like Real Madrid.
Yeah.
So I think I'm sort of not thinking too far beyond sort of, if we finish 4th, because it might look different come 10:30 tomorrow night.
Yeah, no, and I think that's I was someone that, to be honest, as soon as it was announced, I was on my own. I was definitely in the minority. I really liked it straight away. Like, I found the Champions League that, like, even before we got back into it, like, I just didn't really care about it until it got to the knockout stages, and even then, only the quarters really. And I do feel like, don't get me wrong, I don't think this new format is like going to be completely entertaining all the time. I do think there's going to be 2 to 3 match days that are a bit redundant. Feels like one too many games, but when it gets to this point where you're on the final match, I'm like, this is fucking quality. Like, I'm really excited for tomorrow to see how it all pans out, and like, it'll be interesting to see if season on season that kind of excitement stays there. But yeah, for this, I'm intrigued and excited. So yeah, let's go back to tomorrow. Just got a couple of questions in from Nileswood, who's in the chat, which we will talk about on the next slide actually, because they're relevant to the predicted lineups. But cheers for joining the chat live, Niles. Hope you're good. We'll cover that in a second. Girona's lineup when they beat, what badge is that? Is that Rayo Vallecano?
Rayo Vallecano, it is.
It is. Oh, look at that. Fountain of knowledge, me.
There you go.
I can't confess to know anything about their best 11 or anything, so I'm just going to read who played from the weekend. They lost 2-1. It was Gazzaniga in goal, a back four of Martinez, Lopez, Juanpe, and Daley Blind. Midfield of Aspria, Martin, Herrera, Van der Beek, and Hill, and Danjuma up top. I have nothing to add here in terms of information, knowledge. Is there anything you want to talk on Girona's lineup before we turn to Arsenal?
So I think the main thing to mention there is they're without one of their best players who makes a lot of it tick in Miguel Gutierrez. He's a Real Madrid youth product at left back. I think Real Madrid are actually considering bringing him back this summer. But he is sort of the fullback that will step into midfield. He's recently been out injured. He actually played a few games in midfield. Sort of quality player, but so I think it has an impact on them. So I think sort of him being out, there's been a couple of others out, but I think him being out sort of does make a real difference to them.
Sure. Fair play. Thank God he's out then. Onto the Arsenal one. So lineup will be interesting tomorrow, because like you said, we're more or less through, right? Like, it's going to take a freak circumstance for it to happen. And I don't know, like, some of the players, Havertz in particular, he looked absolutely on his backside at the end of the game. So the lineup against Wolves was Raya, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, Lewis, Skelly, midfield three of Waneri, Partey, Rice, and front three of Martinelli, Havertz, Trossard. Niles' question was on Miles Lewis Skelly, if he's available. Niles was saying he's not sure how that ban is going to work with our assumed appeal. He's available, mate. It's if the ban is upheld, it's a domestic ban, so it doesn't impact the Champions League. So working on the assumption he's banned for 3 games, it doesn't account for a Champions League game. So he's available. And yeah, I don't know if like when we'll find out about the appeal, because I do think there's probably an element that will influence the selection there, where if Lewis Skelly's out for 3 games, do you play him? And if you know he is available, do you rest him for those other 3 games? So one on there. Niles has said he wants to see Lewis Skelly start, and Calafiori sub in. Both brilliant players who play different. Agree on that. And on will Odegaard be back? Don't know. Part of the reason of the timing of this pod being 3:30 p.m. UK time the day before the game was I thought we'd have a press conference by now, but we haven't. So not sure. We haven't got any news on Odegaard. The fact that it was an illness makes me think he'll be touch and go. But
back in training today.
Okay.
I did see earlier him and Marino were both in training earlier today.
Fair play. All right. So on the 11, how do you think Arteta will approach it? Like, because we do have Man City on Sunday. We do then have Newcastle in the second leg of the semi-final next week. Do you think he'll go and rotate a couple? Like, I know we're not in a position where we can too many, but do you see a position here where like who was the Butler Oyedeji? Do you see a position where someone like him comes into the team? What's your stab at a starting 11 for tomorrow?
So I think that there are a couple of those where it's just like, okay, who can we rest? Sort of who can, who has to play? I know there's sort of the thing in my mind of will we get sort of possibly one last, but Kieran Tierney start?
Yeah, that would be nice.
That's something that I'm keen on. I don't think it's impossible, but
neither do I.
But I think we might see a change there because I think it's uncertain whether the ban will get overturned. I know everyone sort of said, including people in positions of authority, have said, well, authority, aka Dermot Gallagher, said it shouldn't have been a red. But whether that will get overturned is difficult to know. So I think unless we hear something sort of this evening or whatever, which I don't think we will, Arteta will probably have to prepare it as if he's going to be out. So I think we'll probably see sort of Zinchenko come in there, for example. I think we'll see sort of Jorginho come into midfield.
Yeah.
I'd be stunned if we saw Kai Havertz start the game.
Who do you think starts instead of him then? Because I'm the same. And my brain has gone to Trossard false 9 and then maybe Martinelli, Sterling on the wings. I also think Jorginho will come into midfield, Rice in there. If Odegaard's healthy, I think he plays. If not, I think Beneri will start again. In terms of the back 4, I think it will be I don't know. There's so many options in the defence for once, other than that right back. This would have been a great game for White or Tomiyasu to come back into. I don't know. Could Partey go right back? Jorginho, Marino, Rice? I don't know. But yeah, in terms of defence, I definitely see. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same back 5, honestly.
No, it wouldn't shock me. I think there's so many things on the table. Like I'm talking about Zinchenko, there's Calafiori mentioned in terms of getting him a start, because you might need him to start at some point, and so just getting more minutes into him, it might be the way he looks at it. You've got Kiwior. Do you really want someone like Gabriel, who's had a couple of issues in the last sort of month, starting in a game where he might not be needed? That sort of thing. All comes into it, but he might also just be like, let's try and get the game won and then potentially bring players off in the second half.
Yeah, I think the management around those 2 centre-backs is going to be interesting. Like you said, there's been some issues around Gabriel. Saliba missed, forgot what game it was, but he missed a game recently, didn't he?
Yeah.
What game was that? That's completely escaped. Was it Villa?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was Villa. But either way, I'm going to have a stab at my predicted 11 just to get it out there, and I think that will probably inform it. I think it will be Raya, Timber, Saliba, Gabriel, I think he will go for it. I don't think he'll play a Kiwior, but this feels like the game you do it. Like, this feels like the game where there's not many consequences to it, to be honest. But I think he's going to go full strength. I think Lewis Skelly will I think Arteta will kind of play on the kind of us v them thing, and as a result, Lewis Skelly will play regardless of what happens in his ban and stuff. So I think Lewis Skelly will keep the show. In midfield, yeah, I think he loves Jorginho in these kind of games, don't he? So Jorginho, Rice, one of Waneri, Odegaard, and then front three. Yeah, I think it will be Sterling, Trossard, and Martinelli, personally. Yeah. What about you?
So I'm going Riot and goal. I think as much as I'd love to see sort of Timber come out the team, I think he will start there. I'm going Saliba and Kiwior, and I think we'll see Calafiori at left back, just because I'm worried about that, or just because I'm thinking he'll be thinking about that sort of Lewis Skelly potentially being out or not. So I think Calafiori may be getting some minutes. Rice, Jorginho, I'm going to say Odegaard because if he's back in training, because it was illness, I think he'll play. And I think, I've sort of gone back and forth, but I think ultimately Sterling and Martinelli either side of Trossard.
Fair play. Alrighty, and then that leads on to the score predictions. And I guess you touched a little bit on what we can expect from a Girona play style, but how do you see the game going tomorrow? And fundamentally, what do you think the score will be? Just while you do that, I'll just shout out BBK Sports. Good morning from Seattle, USA. Good morning.
So I think the one common thread that people will see if they look at any numbers for Girona this season is they've had real issues scoring goals.
Ha, nice.
They've scored 29 goals in 21 games in the league, and they've scored 4 goals in 7 games in the Champions League. So when that's your issue, I think Arsenal is a team you don't really want to come up against.
Yeah, it's literally the worst team you could come up against in Europe, to be fair. Maybe he will just go Kiwior then, if he does that.
So I think, they're not necessarily, they don't concede loads, and they actually sort of, they gave Liverpool an awkward game. They ended up losing, but earlier in this campaign.
I think I watched bits of that, actually.
Yeah, they've it's similar numbers. They've scored 29 and conceded 29 in 21 games in the league. Wow. And they've conceded 11 goals in 7 games in the Champions League. So they don't.
I'm sure I read something about them conceding from crosses and stuff as well. I'm sure I read that in a preview somewhere. Defensively and statistically, they're one of the worst for chances or goals conceded from crosses. Can't remember what it was, but as I said previously, we're fucking obsessed with crosses at the minute. So maybe that's a matchup to watch out for.
So I'm going with a relatively comfortable 2-0. Obviously, you can see any number of things if it's comfortable, if sort of, there will be someone there who has an eye on what else is going on around. If it's comfortable, if they know they're through, or if they know, say, Barcelona are losing and second place is on, does it then change things? But so maybe it slips to a 2-1 or something like that. But I'm going 2-0 in this one.
Fair play. I've got the exact same. I think it'll be relatively comfortable, and especially from what you've described about them as well. Yeah, I think we'll have more than enough. I think we'll be able to whatever I've said in my predicted 11. Arteta does seem to get the changes in the Champions League spot on, in my opinion. Every time the lineup drops, I do feel fair play. He's nailed that. So I'm sure there'll be 1 to 3, 4 changes in there. I think he'll get the balance right, but I think we'll have a team on the pitch strong enough to go and get the win. I'm going 2-0 as well. Just final thing is, I guess, looking out on, it's obviously 18 games at the same time. So that's going to be super exciting. Just trying to look at some of the ties that are relevant to us. Barcelona, like you said already, could the second place be up for grabs there? They've got Atalanta at home. Inter Milan, I want to say, are below us, but on the same points. They've got they've got Monaco at home. The big ones are obviously City, Madrid, Bayern. Looking at, I know it's not particularly relevant to us, but it could be depending on where we fall and who we play in the knockout rounds. But yeah, going to be an interesting night seeing how that all pans out. Thanks a lot for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Always nice Always nice to learn about the European teams from yourself. Where can people follow you on the socials?
So it's at Angus81, and if anyone is particularly interested in the Championship and the Gaffer Fantasy game, I also have the EFL Fantasy podcast, which is at EFL_fantasy on Twitter. But I will fess up. I run that account, and I'm not the best at running it. So at Angus81 is the best place to grab me.
Lovely stuff. Nice one. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks for the education as always. And for everyone that was live, thanks for joining. For people watching back, let us know your comments below. Let us know what you think the score will be and how you're feeling about the new format. Will we know tomorrow who the permutations of who we can then play in the knockout?
Yeah, I think there is a whole sort of draw system mapped out. So I think in theory we can work out roughly who will play throughout.
Exciting stuff. So yeah, let's keep an eye on that. But yeah, on to Girona. Hopefully a nice 2-0 win as we've predicted. And then next episode will be back on Friday. Yeah, the big one, previewing the City game. Will we have a signing by then? We'll see. But Angus, thanks a lot. Cheers, everyone. Up the Arsenal.